From a Western perspective, Japanese media has for a long time had quite a big reputation for being bizarre at times. A lot of this simply comes down to cultural differences, and if you were to put a magnifying glass on Western media in the same way, you could definitely say the stuff we come out with can be just as strange. Despite this, I think it's still fair to say that Japanese media is more willing to go there with less conventional storytelling. So when I say this fairly unknown film is the weirdest piece of Japanese media I've come across in recent times, I believe many viewers will think that it has some substantially large boots to fill. So, why should you care? Well, this isn't just down to quirkiness or some edgy creative trying their best to make something so obscure and esoteric that it says nothing about anything. The book by Kobo Abe, from which this film is adapted, is on the Penguin Modern Classic list, and that alone should tell you that there is at least some substance here. If you want a very quick but somewhat reductive comparison to quickly give you an idea of what the Boxman entails, imagine American Psycho, but the protagonist is homeless instead of being a multi-millionaire investment banker, and instead of an axe or nail gun, his weapon of choice is a plushy crocodile filled with sand. Whether intentional or not, the original book seems to have predicted the experience and issue of modern society's entrenched and umbilically attached relationship with the internet and technology, even though it was published a decade before the invention of the internet. The director of the film adaptation shares this exact interpretation, as well as a fan favorite video game designer icon and Hollywood selfie artist Hideo Kojima. He made a post on his social media regarding this interpretation of the book, as well as stating how influential it was on him. And yes, this novel is what inspired the iconic cardboard box from the Metal Gear Solid series. Now you're probably thinking, how did I even come across this film? I must be some stuck-up film school graduate who revels in finding extremely niche foreign language films and treats Letterboxd like a full-time job. Well, funnily enough, I actually only watched this film because my mum stumbled across a screening for it at a local cinema and read a few descriptions about it online but didn't look too much into it. She thought it sounded like a funny and quirky watch, and so my family and I went to see it for her birthday last September. Not long before this, my parents had been raving about the Japanese language film Perfect Days, so I just assumed it was going to be something in a similar vein. Wholesome but more quirky and a bit absurd. So yeah, I did not anticipate watching a scene where this guy from the Shogun series demands and is given an enema while sitting in a cardboard box. Just to reiterate, my mum did not realise this film had stuff like this in it. Also, the weirdness of this film doesn't simply come from the odd sexual scenes like this, and in truth, every aspect of this film, from the cinematography, the setting, writing and so on, has some insane element to it. And anyway, if you've been watching any of the smut that Hollywood's been churning out recently, then I think you'll be fine with this, and if you're not, then you can just watch this video instead. But anyway, after coming out of the screening, I initially really did not like this film. There were aspects I thought were really cool, like the locations, set design and the fight scenes, but this admiration got completely overshadowed by the initial strong negative reaction I had fresh out of the cinema, which I think was largely due to how I was completely unprepared for such a disorientating experience. I thought I was going to watch a quirky indie film about two men who live in cardboard boxes duking it out before some inevitable wholesome ending, but instead, I was met with so many levels of absurdity and metafiction which increases as the film progresses, and it just left me feeling very odd. It was like expecting to watch La La Land but being shown Mulholland Drive instead. But as the days went by, it really nagged me and I just couldn't get it off my mind because I felt like a lot of it went straight over my head. So, in light of how confused this strange film about a man wearing a cardboard box left me, I did what every 20-something film enthusiast would do. I went on YouTube and I typed in "The Boxman Film Explained," and to my surprise, nothing came up. In fact, this is how I found out that the film was actually based on a book, as the only videos I could find were reviews or podcasts talking about this. It was written in the early 70s by Kobo Abe, who is a notorious playwright and author, but is more known for his 1962 novel The Woman in the Dunes. Abe's work is unsurprisingly mainly characterized by existentialism and surrealism, and he is often referred to as the Japanese Franz Kafka. You know, the guy who wrote the first installment in the Animorphs series. Seeing as the YouTube film video essay nerds had failed me this time, I had to do something I thought I would never have to do in my adult life. I read a book. Reading the original novel did help me understand my second viewing of the film a lot better, while also adding a whole new dimension of confusion and surrealism. I will discuss the book a bit more later in the video, but to summarize, it heavily focuses on isolation, identity, perception, and voyeurism. It includes some of the most beautiful and profound passages, surrounded by the psychotic ramblings of a man who chooses to live in a cardboard box as you descend further into his psyche. The film was released in early 2024 and was directed by Japanese cult filmmaker Gakuryū Ishii, who is known for his focus on punk and industrial aesthetics with films such as Crazy Thunder Road, Electric Dragon 80,000 Volts, and Burst City, to name a few. Quentin Tarantino has even publicly acknowledged Ishii as a major influence on him and his work. The Boxman film has been in the works since the 90s and was meant to be shot in Germany in 1997, but unfortunately the production fell through and the rights for the story went to Hollywood, which never led to anything either. Luckily, Ishii was finally able to release his take on the Boxman, which coincidentally was released 100 years after the birth of Kobo Abe. The film starts off in a gritty, urbanized area of Japan, and we are introduced to a nameless Boxman. He's technically called Myself, but for the sake of the video and to avoid confusion, I will just refer to him as the protagonist. We are immediately shown his perspective of the world in both views from inside his box as well as his philosophy behind becoming a Boxman, which is described to us through deep and gritty narration. He doesn't care that people would view him as trash or a voluntary societal dropout. In fact, he invites you to scorn him as he believes it's actually the opposite and he is the one passing judgment on everyone else. The fabricated box you believe in, you are the ones inside it. I am the Boxman. I unilaterally watch you, completely erasing my identity. He goes on to explain how even if regular members of society see him, they don't actually acknowledge him and will pretend they don't notice him. However, there is an exception to this. Anyone who becomes overly conscious of the Boxman will become a Boxman. As we are being told this, we see a masked man snapping pictures of the protagonist, which initiates a chase and leads to a third party getting involved, although he manages to lose them. We are then introduced to three characters who will become more important later in the film, but they all seem to be colluding in some sort of plot as we see them surveilling the Boxman. Cutting back to the protagonist, we see the man waving the flag from earlier has caught up to him and tries to fight him. It's not really addressed in the film, but I think this character is meant to be a reference to the book regarding the attitudes real homeless people have to the Boxman. Basically, they hate Boxmen, which is likely due to how they choose to live a life on the streets rather than being forced into that situation. It's not really a major concept explored in the book, and I think in the film's case it was an excuse for Ishii to do this slapstick but amazing fight scene near the beginning of the film. This all culminates in the Boxman being shot in the shoulder by the masked photographer. After he escapes, the woman from earlier approaches the Boxman and tells him he should visit a very specific nearby hospital. Despite being suspicious that this mysterious woman is connected to the masked shooter, the protagonist becomes enamored with her and decides to go get his shoulder treated. We find out that the man surveilling him is the doctor at this hospital, and the woman called Yoko is a nurse, or at least that's who they are pretending to be. While being treated for his wound, he blacks out and we are shown how he became a Boxman. This sequence of events is eerily similar to what has started to happen with the masked shooter. The protagonist finds a Boxman in his garden. At first he takes pictures of him, and then he shoots him, and then he becomes a Boxman. The hospital becomes the epicenter of the film. The protagonist becomes obsessed with Yoko as he tries to figure out if she's complicit with whoever is trying to kill him or if she's being manipulated and forced into this situation. The doctor becomes hellbent on stealing the mantle of the Boxman while also seemingly trying to enact a plan to euthanize the third man and framing it as a suicide. As all of this unfolds, the narrative becomes more incoherent and surreal, certain characters seem to morph together, the plot becomes more and more meta, and it becomes clear that we might have just been traveling deeper and deeper into the box this whole time. I think one of the first things to understand about this film is that it utilizes the unreliable narrator trope. For anyone unfamiliar with this, it's essentially when the narrator does not provide the audience with the objective truth and cannot be fully trusted. This can be either done deliberately by the narrator to mislead the audience or unintentionally, but both force you to question everything you're being told. Some classic examples of this would be Fight Club or American Psycho. I will say that I think this generally works a bit better in literature. When it's done in film, you sort of risk the "but it was all just a dream" cliche when you show a character experiencing an inaccurate sequence of events playing out like it's reality. But with writing, you can recount a series of events from the point of view of a character, and in reality there would be at least some level of exaggeration or curation of how events played out as opposed to the objective truth. Kobo Abe wrote the novel in a way that lends itself to the unreliable narrator trope and makes it seem like you are reading a messy notebook or perhaps the inside of a cardboard box. It's non-linear, full of tangents, random photos, and different points of views and perspectives. This isn't to say I don't think the film was effective in translating this to the format of cinema. Ishii utilizes these somewhat jarring straight-on shots where the character will seemingly address the narrator directly, even though the protagonist isn't always in that scene. There is also a sequence towards the end of the film where we are being shown the fake doctor being questioned by police. But we see the investigator reposition herself unnaturally to address the camera before a jump shot to a more dramatic version of that same shot among other obnoxious elements. This kind of meta style of filmmaking is all done to indicate that what we are seeing isn't real and is actually a reflection of what the fake doctor is writing down, with this whole sequence abruptly ending when he tears up the paper. The Boxman actually takes the concept of an unreliable narrator a step further, and we are unsure who the narrator actually is, with the concept of narration and who is dictating the story becoming a focus of the film in a very meta way. This is hinted at early on in the film, like with Yoko saying to the protagonist, "You were mumbling in your sleep like you were narrating a novel," and then becomes increasingly more obvious until the characters are directly questioning the narrator and if he knows for sure he is the real narrator and not being written by someone else as a fictional character. If this isn't already confusing enough, it appears as if the fake doctor realizes that the only way to become the true Boxman is to become the narrator of the film. What we get is a narrative that essentially consumes itself. Another major and pretty obvious aspect of this film is voyeurism. This is a theme that's been explored in cinema for decades now, as it lends itself very well to the format. A character watches someone and the audience gets to vicariously pry as well. The Boxman not only explores the dynamic and act of watching someone, but also the experience of being watched. While the basic concept of the Boxman directly expresses this idea, the dynamic of watching someone versus being watched is explored throughout the book. While the film is less direct with it, you can see that Ishii is actively referencing this aspect of the novel throughout the film. Here is a passage from the book that encapsulates this idea. "In seeing there is love, in being seen there is abhorrence. One grins trying to bear the pain of being seen. But not just anyone can be someone who only looks. If the one who is looked at looks back, then the person who is looking becomes the one who is looked at." The reason for the box is to be able to watch without being watched back. It's a means of observing while erasing your identity. I think Yoko's function in the narrative is to serve as the opposite of the Boxman. She tells the protagonist early on in the film how she was a model and even did nude life modeling before working as a nurse and would get fulfillment from it. She represents the idea of being seen, but without the abhorrence experienced by the Boxman. The protagonist describes her as the light at the end of the tunnel that is the box, and he sees her as a way out from the Boxman lifestyle. This film 100% reinforces Laura Mulvey's male gaze theory. The only prominent female character in this film is presented in a very problematic way. And this was one of the reasons that made me dislike this film on my first viewing. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Having the only main female character being completely subservient to three older men where she will strip nude when ordered to did feel uncomfortable to watch. For most of the film, Yoko does not seem to have any agency and is simply a tool for three male characters to achieve their desires. But with her, along with pretty much everyone in this film, likely being a delusion created by the mind of a man from 1973, it is unsurprising that she manifests into an objectified and reductive concept of a woman and is likely a reflection of some sort of fantasy. This isn't just about how a male protagonist perceives real women, but rather an unfiltered look at how the character of a woman would be created in the mind of a completely isolated and delusional man. It's problematic, but unfortunately it's very honest. And this isn't even just a "it's of its time, that's just how men used to perceive women in the 70s" type thing. This is exactly how modern, extremely isolated and voyeuristic men view women, also known as incels. This isn't the only parallel that can be drawn to modern society. As mentioned earlier in the video, the book specifically feels far more relevant in the present day with the advent of modern internet culture, with many of the abstract and surreal parts of the book becoming in some ways a reality. But before we get into that, I wanted to quickly talk about a connection I imagine at least some people watching this video have already made, being hikikomori. This is a Japanese term that describes people who withdraw from society and choose a life of isolation and confinement, usually staying in their bedrooms for months to years, and are in most cases completely dependent on a parent or carer to achieve this lifestyle. Although it's stereotypically attached to Japan, it's something that occurs across the globe and is increasing in modern times for pretty obvious reasons. Although in the West, we usually refer to these individuals as NEETs. This is not to say that the Boxman novel predicted hikikomori, as the phenomenon was supposedly already being observed in Japanese culture at the time of its writing, so it could have even informed Abe regarding the novel. But there are definitely some really interesting parallels when you look into the perspective of real people who live this lifestyle. In this article written by Ali Conti speaking to a real American hikikomori called Luca, you'd expect that he would ultimately and purely resent his lifestyle, but instead he believes, going outside is a prison, but this room is clarity. I refuse to work for $8 at Taco Bell and be another's lackey when I am my own god. This mindset is extremely similar to what the protagonist presents throughout the Boxman, especially in the opening where he essentially tells the audience his Boxman manifesto and why he chooses to reject modern society. It really echoes a similar sentiment. After reading the book and watching the film for a second time, one thing that stuck in my mind was how the Boxman seemingly illustrates the experience of viewing the world through the lens of smartphones, social media, and technology. And this doesn't just apply to people with extreme lifestyles on the fringes of society, such as the hikikomori people. A large part of the information we receive and send to other humans gets filtered through this small little window we all carry around with us everywhere we go. We end up curating our own realities and perceptions of the world through social media algorithms that keep us in echo chambers, all from a safe position where you can look out into the world without the abhorrence of the world looking back at you. You can unilaterally watch in a way that completely erases your identity. As already mentioned, director Ishii shares a very similar interpretation of Kobo Abe's novel, and in an interview with Wired Japan following the film's release, he very eloquently explains his perspective. Ishii states that Abe predicted the image of modern society and the state of human beings 50 years onwards from the book's release. He elaborates with, "Its cocoon-like appearance, creating a kingdom in a small box and peering one-sidedly at the world from a protected position. It's just like us with smartphones in our hands. As a result of the overflow of information and the complexity of society and things, we are in a state of confusion where we cannot judge what is true and what is false. In the midst of all of this, we desperately want answers, and because we believe what we believe to be true and have a tendency to blindly trust others, we end up only seeing a one-sided view of the truth as it pertains to us. We end up trying to eliminate any truth that could threaten that truth. Boxman depicts delusions in a narrow world where many overlapping layers exist, but these circumstances surrounding humans have accelerated compared." Another quite specific and ultra-modern thing that Abe seems to have addressed back in 1973 was content addiction and doom scrolling. In the book, there is a section where the protagonist describes how at one point he was completely addicted to the news and would spend most of his day watching television news broadcasts, listening to the radio, or reading newspapers. The globe's capable of changing shape the minute you take your eyes off it, even for a second. The protagonist talks about how he believes the reason people end up addicted to the news like he did is for the reassurance of being aware of all the terrible things happening in the world without being affected by them, and for the feeling of preparedness and control for if the ultimate news that the world is ending one day comes. If you look into why people doom scroll, it will echo a very similar explanation to this. Overall, I am still unsure whether or not The Boxman is a good film. Ishii definitely achieved his goal of creating a love letter to Abe's original novel, but that isn't the criteria of what makes a film good or compelling. Especially when, at least in my case, I had to read the book and re-watch it to get a good grasp of what was going on and to gain an appreciation for it. I think in a lot of cases, having to go on to do more research to understand a film better is usually a death sentence. Tenet. But sometimes this can add a certain charm to a film. In my opinion, a film like Primer falls under this category. Some people rate films purely based on enjoyability and excitement, while others try to take a more objective approach. In this case, I don't think The Boxman specifically falls into either of these categories, but you will experience something very, very strange and unique. This is an avant-garde film, and it definitely is not for everyone, which is evident from the small amount of ratings and reviews on Letterboxd. It was a very unique experience watching this. It made me feel uncomfortable at times, it made me laugh, and it confused me. But not all good art is meant to make you feel good. I loved the setting of the hospital in the film, and I've never seen a film achieve such an eerie and weird atmosphere with a location like that. I think any other filmmaker would have heavily relied on a far more clinical and washed out look to try and achieve an unsettling feeling, but instead, Ishii chose to adorn the medical facility with cacti, euphorbia and other succulents under grow lights, and had sand on the floor of other rooms. It's this weird mismatch that creates tension while also looking really cool and aesthetically pleasing. I also have to mention the silly but very well choreographed fight scenes. I wouldn't have expected these slapstick scenes to work well in an edgy avant-garde film such as this, but it just does and acts in favour of the bizarre nature of the film. They say never bring a knife to a gunfight, but my guy pulled up with the soft crocodile toy filled with sand and still clutched it. Ultimately, this video is just my interpretation of the Boxman. Ishii has stated that the goal with this film was to put the audience in the box, and by me peering into this film and trying to make sense and form a reality of sorts from what I have seen, in some ways fulfilled that experience according to his interpretation of the book. I have tried to make sense of a mass of overlapping and confusing information in a way that I feel will translate into a compelling YouTube video. Maybe you will watch the film or read the book after this and come away with a completely different perspective, or maybe you'll just think it's shit.